I am excited to introduce our speaker today. Let me begin with a few questions. Have you ever wished you were more creative? Do you find yourself struggling to innovate? Could you use some strategies to cultivate innovation in 2023? If you answered yes to any of those questions, then you are in the right place. Our presenter today has helped thousands become more creative. Her clients include the Mayo Clinic, Stanford University, and the Department of Homeland Security. She's a TEDx speaker, MC, and the creator of Climer cards. She's a creativity expert. When not working, you can find her building something in her wood shop or whitewater canoeing. Helping us learn to be deliberate creatives, please join me in welcoming from Asheville, North Carolina, speaker, consultant, and DIY addict, Dr. Amy Climer.
Thank you, Diane. Hi, Bacon. It's so good to see you all. Good to be here. I was here last January, and so it's like, okay, we've got some sort of annual thing happening, but I gotta just tell you all, I know you probably hear this all the time, but I love the name of your group. It's so fun. So today is all about creative problem solving, as Harry mentioned earlier. And by the way, I share my slides through my video feed. So it might be helpful to put your view in speaker view, and then you can see the slides best that way. And then there'll be times where we're talking and you can jump back over to gallery view. So the other thing that, so basically, let me say, we're going to look at how do you solve problems as a consultant, or rather, how do you get really creative in the problem solving you're doing? And I'm going to share with you some techniques and tips. It will be really helpful if you have some pen and paper handy. So if you can just get up, grab some pen and paper if you need to, and because I'm going to have you write down some things as we go. And maybe you want to take notes if you have some ideas that come up. All right. The other thing is we're just here for an hour, if that. And so if you're interested in more resources afterwards, I'd be happy to send you an email with just a bunch of resources around creativity and innovation. If you put your name in the chat, I'll make sure to get that, or your email rather. And you can either send that just to me if you want, if you don't want to put it in there for everyone. And I'll remind you at the end as well. So, all right. So if you got your video on, I want you to raise your hand if you think that you're creative. I just want to get a poll here. Where do you think you all are at? Okay, all right. I'm seeing a lot of hands up. This is good. This is good. I see some people are like, I don't know, sort of. It sort of depends on the day, depends on the context. And I gotta say, there were a lot of hands up. Now, maybe some of you are raising your hand because you're like, oh, this is the right answer. I better raise it. But I was thinking about this, Deborah, when you were sharing, the whole thing about sitting on your hands. One time I was doing this talk live, it was kind of keynote style, and I asked the same question to everybody. And this woman in the front row got this panic look on her face, and she actually sat on her hands. She was like, oh no, I'm not creative. I was like, oh my gosh, maybe it was good acupressure for her, but one of the things, I feel like it's really encouraging to see so many people with their hands up, but often when people don't put their hands up, in the case of this woman that I was referring to, and if I start asking questions like, why do you think you're not creative? Usually it's because of a misunderstanding of what creativity is. And so in this case, she was like, oh, I can't draw. So the good thing is this has nothing to do with your ability to draw, which I think, collectively as a culture, as a society, we are having a better understanding of this than we did 15, 20 years ago. Like, people get this now. But let's look at what creativity is really quick. So Harry shared a definition earlier. I'm just looking at creativity. This is a definition that I use. It's all based on creativity research. Creativity is novelty that is valuable. So really simple, 6 words. Anyone have any, if you have any thoughts or reactions, what does this actually mean? Feel free to throw those in the chat, or if you want to open up, just want to chat about this definition for a moment. So feel free to put something in the chat or raise your hand and unmute yourself. Donovan says, why does it have to be valuable? What do you all think? Why do you think that there's this element of valuable in there? What does that mean? It's a good question. Any thoughts? Yeah, Deborah.
I think valuable is going to be subjective.
Absolutely.
It's whether the person who's asking that question or is thinking about where am I at. It's what do I have that shows as valuable to what I'm up to, right? And then it's also in the eyes of the receiver, of the perceiver.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And is there of something of input that allows them to get, well, like back to what I was saying, getting from where you are to where you want to be.
Yeah.
When
Great.
that,
yeah. Herb.
Yeah, people, well, I speak for myself and other people I know, people experience the benefit of something. They don't experience, so I agree with what was just said, that it's personal.
Nice, thank you.
It has to be valuable.
So there's some good comments here in the chat. Luann says, does it help not hinder the process, etc.? Luann, I'm not actually sure what that means. If you're open to either expanding on that or unmuting. Oh, you can unmute.
Yeah, I think when I say, and I think of it as valuable or not, it would help us towards the outcomes we're trying to achieve, or the problem solving, or the discussion, or the round table, or whatever the thing is, and doesn't hinder what we're trying to accomplish or do. It doesn't hinder, it doesn't stop it, throw a wrench in it. It supports it, so it adds value.
And so you're saying that hindering can be a good thing, or you want to avoid the hindering?
Avoid hindering if you really want this to happen.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, great. Thank you. Couple other comments there. There's definitely discernment in the value. Yeah, Millie, that's a really great point. I think, and which is building on what Deborah said, that there is this subjectiveness, like it's in the eye of the beholder. And sometimes, like Anna said, there's that value could come about later after the fact. And maybe we don't realize it at the time. And so what happens is that because there's subjectiveness in creativity, I think that's often why we don't think of ourselves as being creative, because there is this judgment aspect of it, and that other people are going to judge you to decide, like, well, is that creative or not? Does that count? Sometimes, like, people say that, like in my workshops, like, well, I don't know if this counts as being creative, because there is that judgment piece. And I think, to me, it's very similar to leadership, and that we often don't get to decide if we're a good leader or not. That is up to the people that we're leading. Like, they're the ones that are going to tell us, like, or, through their behaviors or comments or whatever, whether or not we're a good leader. And that might give us some information. And so there is that aspect of creativity, especially when, as a consultant, you're working with a company, like, does this fit? Is this more creative? And some of you have probably gotten feedback over the years that, you're really innovative, you have some new ideas, I really appreciate your fresh perspective. And that's the real value, I think, of a consultant. Moss says, I don't really think it always needs to be very novel. Creativity can be sensing when to apply a solution, even when it might have been used before. Yeah, so that's a really good point, Moss, that I think in this case, the way I think of the word novel is it could be novel in that situation, in that thing. It could have been something someone else did. I mean, when we were in our breakout groups, I was sharing a story of something I did a couple months ago that, it really wasn't. It was something that many, many other people had done, but in this particular minute little example, it was like, oh, this was an idea that popped up and I tried it and it worked. So yeah, it definitely depends, but don't want to get too wrapped up in the definition, but the real point here is that creativity is about creating something new that is going to be beneficial in some way. Hopefully, positively beneficial and not, harmful or anything. If it's helpful, some people are like, well, wait, if that's creativity, what's innovation? I personally do not get really caught up in the differences between those definitions. I'm just in general not someone that spends a lot of time on the details of semantics. But if it's helpful for you, this is a definition I really like. It actually came out of an article in The Atlantic a few years ago. And it's innovation is creativity with economic gain. And to me, that makes a lot of sense because we think of the word innovation as applying to fields like the sciences, technology, like we think, whereas we often use the word creativity to think about the humanities or literature. So we might say, Steve Jobs is really innovative, but Pablo Picasso is really creative. It's like, yeah, they're both kind of going through the same process. They both had a huge impact on our society in very different ways. But again, a little bit semantic. Yeah, Steve says, yeah, very much for a corporate audience. Yeah, I definitely have corporate clients who are like, well, we don't really care about creativity. We just want to be innovative. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. But I think one of the most important things when you're, as a consultant, understanding creativity is that to know that it is a skill that can be and must be nurtured and developed just like any other skill. And I think we sometimes, like, I've definitely heard people say to me, oh, I don't have a creative bone in my body. It's like, okay, well, actually, that's not quite how it works. We all have this inherent ability as humans to be creative. It is so deep in our DNA that we just can't help ourselves. But often what happens is we've gotten messages as we've gotten older that kind of like pushes that out, or we squish that down in ourselves and we ignore it. But if you work on this, you will become more creative. And so the goal today is about the goal today is about giving you some tools and some techniques that you can use to be more creative in your work. And everything I'm sharing is based on the research on creativity. This is what I studied in my PhD, at least for my dissertation. And so this process I'm going to share with you today is called creative problem solving. And it works if you use it. It's pretty remarkable. When I think about that aspect that creativity is a skill and we have to use that, we have to work at that. The mantra that I have is this: be deliberate to be creative. What I've learned is that creativity really does not happen by accident. And sometimes we get confused because we just have this idea that comes to us, or we hear these stories like, Newton, the apple fell on his head and then he figured out gravity. It's like, okay, yeah, you're just looking at this tiny little sliver, and actually there's much more to the story than we often share. And so if you are deliberate in your work to be creative, it will happen. Tony says, I'm sorry, creativity is novelty with the possibility of adding value. Brainstorming is not valuable, but it leads to value. I definitely agree with some of that, Tony. Brainstorming is a piece of the creative process, but it is not the whole process. Actually, it's one little tiny technique that we use, but there's much more to it. And so let me know what you think at the end, and maybe that idea has expanded a bit for you. All right, so all of this, great, but why bother? Why do consultants need to innovate? What's the big deal? And so, yeah, just would love to hear your thoughts on this. This is not a rhetorical question. Like, why do you think this matters for us as consultants? Again, feel free to put your name in the chat, or put your comments in the chat, or unmute yourself and share.
I have a quick comment. I think it's Marissa here. Hi, nice to meet you. I think for consultants, the need to innovate, maybe it's not something new to you, because sometimes we have so much knowledge, so much experience, so much failures that we've had in the past that actually led to innovation, that when we're consulting, it's a matter of seeing all of our knowledge, everything that we know, everything we've experienced as a library. And the creativity comes to see which book or books we're going to pull to help and serve our clients. Because if you give them everything under the sun, it's going to overwhelm them. But the creativity is to know what to pull and what not to pull. What do they need right now to be able to help them move forward?
Yeah, Marissa, that speaks to that, of deciding, like, what do I give them right now? What do I share? That there is a discernment process in creativity, which we'll talk about that. It's not just generating a lot of ideas, even though that's part of it. It's also evaluating those ideas and deciding, well, which ones do we move forward with? So yeah, thanks for sharing that. There's a lot of great comments in the chat. Market differentiation, making a difference for our clients. Clients look for new ideas they can't or don't arrive at on their own. Yeah, that's like, I feel like one of the top reasons to hire consultants. Staying ahead of the pack, bringing new ideas. Yeah, really good stuff. Anyone else want to share before we move on? Yeah, Herb says it. Yeah, go ahead, Herb.
Yeah, real quick. It keeps me interested in continuing to do this work, because when I'm creative, I love that. I can feel it. It gives me energy. And without that, it's just stuff I do. It's like, who cares about that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you said that. I feel the same way. I was talking in our small group earlier how I used to work at a very large university, and it was just sometimes so frustrating because you'd have this idea and you couldn't do anything about it, or it would take 6 months to 3 years to implement. And here I was sharing a story, like, yeah, I had an idea literally at 9 a.m. and by 12 it was implemented and done and led to some really great results. But yeah, I think that ability to have that flexibility is one of the great things about being a consultant. All right, so this is all good. We know what creativity is. We know that it matters in our work. And that doesn't mean that it's always super easy. So I want you to think about what are some barriers that you face when you're trying to be creative. And we're going to do a quick activity as a way to share those barriers. So some of you are familiar with this. I'm going to actually spotlight my screen to make sure you all are seeing this. So I want you to think about a barrier you face when you're trying to be creative. And not yet, but in a moment, we're going to put a link in the chat. And when you go to that link, you're going to see this page. And you're going to scroll down and select a card that represents a barrier you face when being creative. So you're going to scroll down, pick any card that seems to be a good fit, click on it, put in your name, and then why you chose that card. All right, we're going to throw the link in the chat now, and you can go check that out. Once you've submitted your response, feel free to take a moment and read some of the other ones. These are great. I mean, not that it's great you have these barriers, but it's great to see, and great to see the images you picked that go along with them. All right. So if you're still writing, feel free to wrap up that sentence. Don't overthink which picture you're going to choose. And I want you to think about that barrier that you shared. And if you read some of the others, you're probably thinking, oh yeah, that one too. Yep, that's an issue as well. And think about that. I'm going to share, we're going to get into the creative problem solving process now. And I'm just going to give you first a really quick overview. So this process, it was originally developed in the 1940s, but it has been heavily researched and refined since then. It was actually developed by the originator of brainstorming, and his name is Alex Osborne. And the process is based on how we as humans naturally solve problems. But the challenge is all of us have a preference for one or more stages of the process. And so we tend to just gravitate towards that stage. I tend to be someone who loves generating ideas. So I can generate ideas all day, but just having the idea isn't enough. Right? You have to do something with the idea. So let me walk you through it. I want you to think about where you tend to shine in this process. So we start off at the top where we want to clarify what's the issue, what's the problem, what's going on here. Sometimes what happens is if we tend to, if we're not paying attention, we might just skip this and jump right into generating ideas. But if we're not we haven't clarified the problem, then we're usually solving the wrong problem, or it's a little bit off. And then we try to implement an idea and we can't figure out why it didn't work. And it's like, well, because you didn't actually clarify the problem. So people who like to clarify tend to like to ask and actually need to ask a lot of questions. So if you're not a high clarifier, but you are with somebody who is, you might just be like, oh my gosh, more questions. And that's okay. Just be patient. So clarifying from there, once we've really figured out like, okay, this is the issue, then we move into generating ideas. And brainstorming is an ideation technique. It's the one that's most used, most popular, but it's a technique. And I'm going to show you a couple other techniques that are similar, but a little bit different. And that difference can be really helpful for generating ideas. Now, ideally, you're not just generating 1 or 2, 3 ideas. I mean, that I feel like is just, a short grocery list. You're running into the store really quick, but it's about having a really long list, 20, 30, 100 ideas, depending on the context and the need. But especially if it's a big problem, there's going to be a lot of pieces to it. So generating lots of ideas. Now, some of those ideas aren't going to be that good, and that's okay, right? We're just at this point of let's just get it all out there on paper, and then we'll evaluate. I'm sure many of you have been in a situation where you've been in some sort of team group meeting and somebody says, oh, okay, y'all, I'm having this issue and I'm wondering if we can just spend a few minutes brainstorming. I could really use your ideas. And everyone's like, oh yeah, sure, let's go for it. So they explain their problem and then people start sharing their ideas. And around the 3rd or 4th idea, somebody says, oh no, we can't do that. We did that in 1985 and it was a complete disaster. Who's been there? Yeah, okay. Most hands are up. A lot of smiles. Who has made the mistake of being the person to say, oh no, we can't do that? Yep, most of us have done it. I have done it, and I certainly know better. What happens in that moment to the conversation, to the brainstorm? What happens? Yeah, it's yep, thumbs down. It's like, okay, we're done. So understanding why that happens is really important. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but in each of these stages of the process, if I put this back up, you'll see these diamonds. The diamond shape is very intentional, and that when we first start in, say, generating ideas, we want to think really big. We want to get into what's called divergent thinking. From there, so divergent thinking is, we're generating all the ideas, and then we start to evaluate the ideas and move into convergent thinking. The problem is our brain literally cannot do both of those at the same time. Now, some people have gotten really good at switching back and forth. You may have heard of task switching. It's the same concept. Like we can go from divergent to convergent and back really fast, but their brain is physically not doing them at the same time. Most of us aren't as good at that switching, particularly if they don't have like a really good psychologically safe environment within that team, right? And so everyone's like, oh God, I'm not sharing another idea. Like, I don't want to get shot down like that. And now we're in this like convergent mode and we're not thinking divergently anymore. So anyway, so you take, ideally, that doesn't happen. You're able to be in a divergent mode for a little bit, which we're going to practice in a few minutes. And then you're able to move into that convergent mode and select the best ideas. And then from there, you take those best ideas and develop them further. So the development piece, I will admit, this is a place where I often get stuck, is where you're really like figuring out, okay, if we're going to do this, what would it look like? What are the steps we need to take? And you're, for lack of a better way to say it, like fleshing that idea out further. And then from there, it's the actual implementation. And you can probably imagine this is very cyclical because you start implementing and then you're like, oh, wait, what we forgot about this, or this didn't work, or, and so you kind of go on and on. All right. Creative problem solving. How many of you can feel like, oh yeah, I've gone through this process many times? Anyone feeling that? Yeah, I see some hands, some head nods. Good. Yeah, this is based on how we naturally solve problems. The challenge is, as I mentioned before, we can get stuck in certain areas. So there's an assessment tool called Foresight, and I've learned from Foresight that I'm a really strong ideator and I'm a really strong implementer. So where I get stuck is I've gotten better at clarifying. You can build your skills in all these areas. Develop is where I get stuck. So I'll like have this idea and I'm ready to go. And then I'm like, cool, let's do it. Where do we start? What's the first step? And then I get a bit stuck. So understanding that has helped me move past that and helped me be way more successful as a consultant and an entrepreneur, etc. All right, so we're going to actually go through this process briefly as part of, so I want you to think about some sort of challenge or problem that you have as a consultant, and just kind of get that back in the back of your head there. And we're going to start off and clarify what that problem is. So I want you to, let me share this. Albert Einstein was actually a really good clarifier. And he says the mere formulation of a problem is far more often essential than its solution, which may be merely a matter of mathematical or experimental skill. To raise new questions, new possibilities, to regard old problems from a new angle requires creative imagination and marks real advances in science. So really being able to figure out, like, what is that exact problem? Einstein also said if he had an hour to save the world, he would spend 55 minutes figuring out what was that exact problem, and then 5 minutes coming up with a solution. So I don't know if that's really the best ratio, but it does give us a thought that, oh, we would spend a little time on this. Generally, when you're clarifying, it's a time where you're asking a lot of questions. You're trying to see the problem from different angles. What's the background? Who's involved? What information do we not know that we need to know? Sometimes I think consultants can be really good at this when they're coming into working with clients. I think we tend to ask a lot of questions and help them see things from different angles. All right, so I want you to pull out a piece of paper if you haven't already and write down at the top what challenge you're having. It could be in your consulting practice, it doesn't have to be, but just something. It could be really small, it could be big, it doesn't matter, but just something that that's a little bit of a challenge you're trying to figure out, or a problem that you have, or an area you want to get better in. Okay, so hopefully you have a couple, even if it's just some notes for yourself, something written down there. When the way we write or ask a question, many of you know this because you're really good at asking questions as a consultant, but the way you ask a question will impact the response you get, right? It'll also impact the ideas that you get. And so there's a way of writing the questions in the field of creativity that's using the word might. And I like to say might is a mighty word. There's something about this word that sparks this sense of possibility. And so I want you to rewrite your challenge, whatever you wrote down, by starting off with the phrase, how might we, or how might I, whichever is appropriate there, but how might. And there's something about might that is different than could, should, will, do. Like, those imply this sense of there's one right answer, but actually with the word might, it like opens up possibilities and helps us think broader. So I want you to write down at the top of your page, I want you to actually put how might I, or how might we, whatever's appropriate, and then finish the sentence and come up with that in a reasonably succinct sentence there, question. If it's helpful, Millie put in the chat, getting them to take my advice. And so if I were to convert that to a how might, it might say something like, how might I it could be simply get my clients to take my advice, or how might I help my clients understand the ideas that I'm sharing and how that might help, or you want to word that depending on how what kind of ideas you want. Peter says, how might we manage / develop the scope? Yeah, and I would say, Peter, with that, now, you know what you're talking about, but sometimes it can be helpful to be a little bit more specific, like the scope of what? Is this proposals that you're writing, or contracts, or whatever it is? Yeah, same thing, Luann. I might even get a little more specific, like how might I position my services to companies? Like every company in the country, in the world, maybe just a little more specific. And maybe what services, like how might I present or position my coaching services or whatever it is. All right, so hopefully you have an idea. You've got something written down now. Now, if we had more time, we would spend time really looking at that question and doing some research, like, well, what are other people doing? Or, maybe interviewing people and finding out their perspectives. We might look at, like, what have you done in the past that's worked? Why did that work? So really trying to just understand the situation. For today, we're going to skip that a little bit and jump into some ideation. So, because I want to share with you some ideation ideas. All right, so this is where we're really trying to generate lots of ideas to answer that question. And ultimately, we're searching for the one right answer, right? No, absolutely not. None of the work that we're doing as consultants is there one right answer. I mean, it's just, it doesn't even make sense. Like, I can barely think of any example where there might just be one right. Well, no. I would say the way you add up your receipts, there's probably one right answer. Math is not so much, at least the math we're doing is usually not so subjective. But 99% of the type of work that we're doing, there's multiple solutions. There's a zillion ways to look at something. And so I love this quote: "Nothing is more dangerous than an idea when it is the only one you have." And I think if you either thinking about that for yourself or your clients and like, oh, well, the only way they're going to solve this problem is blah, blah, blah. I just recommend erasing that phrase from your vocabulary of the only way to do X. No, there's never only one way. Well, I shouldn't say never, because there we go. Yeah. All right. So we talked a little bit a moment ago about the two ways of thinking, the divergent and convergent thinking. And I want to share with you some guidelines that can really help you think divergently. And first, let me add that one of the things, if you were raised in the US, maybe in Canada, this might apply too, but if you were raised in a pretty typical, like, mainstream education environment, say public schools, chances are you have been taught from, when you're really tiny, kindergarten even, you've been taught how to think convergently. So, standardized tests are a great classic example of convergent thinking. There is one right answer, right? Whereas, even something as simple as a worksheet, an arithmetic worksheet of, 5 plus 5 equals 10. Or 5 plus 5 equals blank. And then you have to fill in the answer, which is 10, in case you didn't know. That's a very convergent thinking question. Now, we could help students develop more of divergent thinking skills and still test the same math skill by saying something like blank plus blank equals 10. And now there's several different answers they could put in there. And they get this opportunity to, like, kind of use that part of their brain. Can you ever remember a time where you were taking a test in, high school or college or something, and the question on the test said, please list all the possible ways for blank? Can anyone remember a time where they've had a question like that on a test? Okay, Deborah has maybe I'm guessing once or twice in your life. Most people, it's so unusual that if it's happened to them, they can actually remember the test question or what the class was. And so we have been trained to be really good convergent thinkers. But then what happens is we get out into the real world and, like, nobody cares. There's no right answer. We want you to think divergently. So, okay, I can get on a soapbox about this. Sorry. All right. So here are the divergent thinking guidelines. Oops. Okay. Suspending judgment. You will get the opportunity to judge the ideas. Judging is a very important part of the creative process. That's part of the time when you're looking at, well, is this idea actually going to be valuable? But the key there is to suspend that judgment just for a little bit. And that includes, of course, judging yourself. We're going for wild ideas. What are the possibilities? And wild, like, in California, what if we did some sort of collaboration with the zoo where we brought the seals into the client's office and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I don't know, something like just completely wacky, where as soon as I say it, you're thinking, oh no, that's never going to happen because of risk management and animal safety and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter, because you take those wild ideas and you combine and build on them and diverge from them. And then finally, this concept that we're using quantity to lead to quality. The more ideas we generate, generally the better they get. Now, not like sequentially. Obviously, within there's going to be some ideas that aren't helpful or good or whatever, but you just get them out so you can move past them, right? So when I'm working with clients, I often will have these like just on the table and these handouts so that they can just be reminded of those divergent guidelines, because we can very easily forget. All right, so I want you to take that piece of paper that you had and want you to number it from 1 to 10. So, I'm sorry, not 1 to 10, 1 to 20. It might just look something like this, how might I, and then just down the side, numbering it from 1 to 20 really quick. That'd be awesome. All right, once you've done that, your next task is want you to just very quickly, without judging, think about as many ideas as you can for your challenge and write them down as fast as you can. Anything that comes up for your particular challenge, no matter how ridiculous or off the wall or mundane it might be, what ideas do you have? If you're feeling a little stuck, I want you to just take your pen and in the corner of your paper or in the margins, just either start writing the alphabet or just draw little tiny spirals. And somehow that helps our brain continue to come up with more ideas. I learned this from Linda Berry, who's this brilliant artist in Madison, Wisconsin, and just write these little tiny spirals or an alphabet. I want you to hold up the number of fingers on your hand for how many ideas you've generated so far. 4, 5, 10, 15, 6. Okay, great. Keep going, keep going. All right. What we're going to do is we're going to, in a moment, go into breakout rooms. I'm going to give you 4 minutes in your room. You're going to have about 3 or 4 people in your room. And somebody in your group would like you to, somebody can volunteer to say, yes, I would love some ideas from you all on my particular challenge. Whoever volunteers, read your challenge. If needed, you can give about 30 seconds of clarity. But what I have found is we usually think people need more background than they really do. And so don't spend a lot of time talking about your problem. Just share that question. And then the rest of the group, your job is to just, as fast as you can, give them some ideas. The listener, whoever owns that problem, wants you to just write down those ideas. Don't tell them it's not going to work or you already have the idea written down. Just nod, thank you, and write. And let's see if how big we can get somebody's list. All right, any questions about the directions and what you're doing in your breakout room? All right, it's going to be really fast. You're just going to have about 4 minutes in there. And Volker, you're sending them off. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. Who got some new ideas that they wouldn't have thought of before on their own? Okay, I see lots of hands up. Awesome, good. I even got some. It wasn't even my problem, and I wrote a couple ideas down for myself. So hopefully that was good. this is this simple technique that we just did, especially the writing down, is, I mean, it's obviously a variation of brainstorming, and so it's just called brain writing. And I am a believer that if an idea is not written down, it doesn't count. I tell my clients this, and it happens all the time with in meetings where, you know, people are sharing ideas and nobody's tracking it, no one's writing it down, and then people get frustrated that their ideas weren't heard, but no one remembers it from you know, to the next week. But anyway, but just sometimes writing and quietly writing first can really help you generate more ideas, especially when you start sharing. We did do that verbal sharing that we just did in the breakout rooms. That's essentially brainstorming. Sometimes that verbal sharing cannot be the most effective way to generate ideas, which we won't get into that. There's some really fascinating research about it. But keep in mind that brainstorming is an ideation technique. So there's many ideation techniques, brainstorming being one. What we just did, I called brain writing. There's some other variations of brain writing. And we're going to do one more technique before we wrap up today. Yeah, Craig says, where does free writing fit in this brainstorm menu of choices? Absolutely, it's another technique, kind of similar to brain writing, free writing. Those all have a lot of overlap. Yeah, really good question. All right, so we're going to do one more technique, and this is called associations. And we're going to use Climer cards, a different deck of Climer cards that we just used a minute ago. And so in a moment, we'll put a new link or a link in the chat, and you're going to see all of these images. And just like before, you can go through and click on any image you want. And hold on, let me get to the right page. Here we go. I want you to look at these images and think about your particular challenge and what more ideas might you get for your challenge. And you can either just write those down on your own, or if you want, you can click on it and then, whoops, that was not supposed to be there. And then you can write your response of, you know, what idea that leads to. We won't know the whole context, but that's okay. At least we'll have a few in there. All right, so we're going to put the link in the chat. This is the same link you were at before, but if we will put it in again, if you have that page still open, that tab still open, please refresh your browser there for that tab so that you get the new page. You should be on this page. Is everything working tech-wise?
What are we trying to pick?
Think about your particular challenge, that how might I question you have, and then look at the images on the screen. What additional ideas do you get?
I'm sorry, Amy, you're talking about what we just did, right?
The same, well, I'm talking about your own problem, the problem. So you can, if you were looking at someone else's problem in your breakout room, forget them for a little bit, go back to that problem that you wrote down, your own how might question. And then, and maybe if it's helpful, I can back up a little bit and say, one of the things that happens is that we run out of ideas, right? This is very normal. It's part of our human process. But when we look at images like on the screen here, it can help spark new ideas that we may never have thought of before. And so that's really where we're going here. Does that make sense, or do I need to clarify further? I love it. All right. If you have more ideas that you want to throw in there, awesome. I just wanted to give you a moment to play with that. And I'll just, if you haven't yet, look at those ideas. And, you know, we don't know necessarily the context or what the exact problem was, because I just wanted you all to be able to focus on your own, but you can already see, like I love this from Ulrika with the picture of the newspaper on fire, and it says, let go of assumptions. Imagine I know nothing yet. Yeah, that would definitely bring in some more ideas or help solve the problem. Yeah, I love this. There's so many good points here. So let me add a little more to this here. If you want to do this on your own, all you need is some images. And so you could buy a couple magazines, especially like magazines that are going to have like a diversity of images, or magazines that you might not normally buy. All right. The other thing is, some of you may be familiar with Climer cards. This is the deck we used a few minutes ago. It comes in a physical deck as well. And I have a friend who she carries her deck with her in her bag, and she's a speaker. She flies a lot. And so whenever she has a problem, she's usually sitting on a plane, and she just goes through the cards like this. And she sort of is just flipping through them until she gets to one that she's like, oh yes, this is going to help me. And as she's thinking about her problem. So just the point here is, you want to think, like, look around you. The most unusual thing might spark an idea. All right, any comments or questions on that technique? It's called associations. Did anyone find they generated another idea, a couple ideas from it that they wouldn't have otherwise? Cool. Yeah. Deborah. Okay. Did you want to add something, Deborah?
Yes. Yes. Thanks for the reminder about pulling out the deck of Climer cards. Duh. I have my deck.
Oh,
and,
nice.
You know, I'm sitting here needing to come up with some ideas for my challenge. And it's all about creating fun events for a school assembly I'm scheduled to do, which I'm excited about. I finally get to get back out in person. And I'm going, okay, what? And all I have to do is pull out the Climer cards.
That's awesome. I love it. Thank you, Deborah. All right, we got to wrap up here in a minute. So I just want to share a couple more things. So we just did ideation. We talked a little bit about clarifying. Now we went into ideation. The next phase in the process is, whoops. Oh, that's not what I meant to share. Oh, it is. So we generate all these ideas. So I want you to take a look at your list. And now we're going to move into that convergence phase where you're actually evaluating the ideas. And I would say, just like a really simple technique, don't overthink it, is just circle the best ideas. Like, what do you think? Circle 3 or 4, maybe 5 of them, depending on how many you have. And then those ideas are the ones that you take into the next stage, which is develop. And those are the ideas you're like, oh, okay, well, what if I was going to do this? One of the things we talked about in the small group I was in was, what if you were giving this away for free for a little bit, like kind of a small version? And so then developing it would be like, okay, if I was going to do this for free, what would that look like? How much would I do? Who would I do this for? So that's part of that develop stage, to figure out, how do you move that idea to an actual solution? And I will share with you some resources afterwards that'll give you a tool to use in this develop stage, if it would be helpful. And then finally, of course, there's implementation. And that I feel like is where we really get more into kind of a project management or time management sometimes. So in all of this, the goal here is be deliberate to be creative. It will not happen by accident. And so making sure that you're being intentional and thoughtful and moving through this process. What I have found for myself is that 9 times out of 10, if I am procrastinating on something and I haven't made any forward progress, whether it's days or weeks or months, or in some cases years on the same problem, usually it's because I've got the idea and I'm willing to implement it, but I haven't developed it, because that's where I fall short. Now, you might be different. Maybe you don't have the ideas because ideating isn't your strength and you're really good at clarifying and developing, but you need somebody else to help you with some ideas. That's easy, jumping on a coffee date or a Zoom call with some folks to get some ideas can help. So figuring out, like, where's your gap and what do you need to focus on with that. All right, we're going to do one more. I think we're going to have a little time left. Want you to go back to that link that you had a moment ago. Maybe you're still in there. And oops. Hold on. Given everything that we've learned today, how are you feeling about being more creative in your work? So we'll put that link in the chat one more time. Go through, pick a feeling. There's also a blank line you can pick. So if you don't see a feeling that works for you, or it's not listed or whatever, pick a feeling, click on it, and then write in your name and why you chose that card. how are you feeling now about being more creative in your work? All right, while you're working on that, just want to add, if you want me to send you some resources, please add your name and email in the chat if you haven't already. One of the things that I'll send you is I have a podcast called The Deliberate Creative. Obviously, you can go find this on your own. But there's some episodes at the beginning, episodes, I think it's 3 through 8, that I walk through this process in more depth. And I actually have a free downloadable workbook that I'll send you as well. So it goes through each of these stages. It has some techniques and tools you can use. So if you're able to see like, oh, this is where I get stuck, I could really use some help here, that would be awesome. Another resource I wanted to share with you, which kind of connects to creativity. It's a little bit of a side note. Is earlier this month, I was part of a group of 29 folks who published a book on virtual facilitation. And so if you are someone who facilitates virtually and does things like this, and you want to get a lot better at it, most of you, I'm sure, are quite adept. But if you want to just like really take that further and get more creative, Jean Marie has her copy. That's awesome. There's a link we can put in the chat there. Diane can put in the chat, and it's available for 30% off. So I can stick around for a few minutes afterwards for Q&A if there are any questions, but I just want to leave by saying creativity is not a selfish act or a bid for attention on the part of the actor. It's a gift to the world and every being in it. Don't cheat us of your contribution. Give us what you've got. Get out there and be deliberate to be creative. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. I think, so much of value, so many different things, whether you're figuring out what you're strong at, where you could get some help, ideas, all of it really wonderful. Thank you very, very much.